Now, if you've been paying attention to the smart home space in the last few months, of course, you've heard of one of these. This is the Aqara FP2, a new style presence sensor that can add a completely new level of intelligence to your home. But what makes this thing so special? Now, you might have seen a ton of YouTubers and smart home bloggers talk about it and throw around words like game changer and revolutionary. But what exactly makes this different than this? And why is it that only the FP2 can do this? So stay tuned as we dive into the technology behind the new FP2 and learn how it can bring a whole new level of intelligence to your smart home. Hey everyone, this is Ryan with The Smart House. On this channel, we do smart home tech reviews and in-depth project guides. So today we're going to be taking a look at a new style of presence sensor from Aqara, the FP2. This sensor uses a new technology called millimeter wave, or mmwave for short. And unlike traditional presence sensors that use passive infrared or PIR, this has a whole host of new features and allows you to do much more in-depth automations in your smart home. So just a quick thank you to Aqara for sending me this hard to find sensor and for sponsoring today's video. There's an earlier version of this sensor from Aqara called the FP1, and also one from fellow YouTuber Lewis from Everything Smart Home that he actually developed with his dad. Plus, you can also purchase millimeter wave sensors to make DIY versions of your own sensor, like this one from Seed Studio. But why is the millimeter wave sensors that much better than that of passive infrared? Well, quickly, let's dive into the science of how these sensors actually work. So starting with the passive infrared sensor, these sensors have been around since the 70s and really haven't changed all that much except for becoming dirt cheap to produce. PIR sensors are electronic devices that measure infrared light that radiates from objects in the field of view. They're called passive because they don't actually emit any energy for detection. They simply detect the infrared energy given off by other objects, like humans or animals. Every object, living or non-living, emits some form of infrared radiation. The warmer the object is, the more radiation it emits. This is how things like FLIR cameras work. PIR sensors work by detecting the changes in this radiation within the detection zone. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Sneakers, and I know that's a dated reference, the entire plot of the final scene in the movie revolves around raising the background temperature in an office so that when Robert Redford's character enters the room, the sensors cannot detect him. This works because the infrared sensors in that room were blinded by the background heat caused by turning the room's temperature up to body temperature. By the way, if you haven't already seen this movie, go watch it. It's a great 90s heist movie and one of my favorites. A PIR sensor will constantly adjust based on the background infrared radiation. This is why if you have an infrared sensor in your living room and the shades are open, the sensor doesn't get set off when the sun hits the windows. It's constantly making minute changes to what it determines is the background temperature, and that way when a warm body does pass through, it can set off the sensor. Now this is great if you want to detect motion happening in a room or hallway, but if a person is standing in a room for more than a minute or so, the sensor is going to think it's background heat and will turn off. That's why most of your passive infrared sensors are truly motion and not presence sensors. That's where millimeter wave technology comes in. Now, millimeter wave technology is a type of radar tech that operates at radio frequencies between 30 and 300 gigahertz. It has a unique property. It can detect motion, position, and even vital signs such as breathing and heartbeat, all in real time without direct line of sight. Millimeter wave presence sensors work by transmitting a low power radio wave and then capturing the reflected waves off objects in the environment. So this would be considered an active sensor as it transmits a signal and then detects the reflection. Now, when these waves encounter a change in the environment, say a person entering the room, they bounce back differently. This change in the reflected waves is what the sensor actually detects. Then advanced algorithms interpret this change to determine whether an object or a person is present. Now, these sensors can operate in any lighting condition through certain types of materials and are not affected by environmental factors like dust and smoke. So now that we know the basics, let's take a look at the features of the FP2. Now before we take a look at the features, if you've watched this channel before, you might have noticed that my basement is finally finished. We finally got the work all done last month, but there's still a ton of tech for me to install and set up. So keep your eye out on the channel for upcoming videos on setting up my smart audiovisual, lighting, and more. And if you missed the introduction video, I've got a link right up here to show you kind of the overview of what our plan was for this basement. Of course, if you're new, please make sure you're subscribed for more great content. And if you've gotten some useful information out of this video, please give it a thumbs up. Now let's check out the features of the FP2. So first thing, when we crack open the box, you'll notice the sensor. Now what's unique about the sensor is it actually comes with a pre-installed articulating mount, kind of similar to the Wyze cameras, and it actually is magnetic, just like the Wyze cameras as well. So you have a lot of flexibility on where you can install this. And installation is key because different installation locations have different features. We'll go into that here a little bit later. The next thing is a 6-foot USB-A to USB-C cable. Now this sensor is not battery powered. It does require constant power being applied to the sensor, so keep that in mind. We also get a little pack with a metal disc inside, again used for mounting, and a small adhesive disc that's used in conjunction with the sensor to allow you to stick it on the wall where you want it. It also comes with some basic mounting hardware in case you want to use that method as well, and a quick start guide. Now previously I've mentioned that this is not a battery powered sensor, so you will need to provide USB power to the device at all times. It does run off of a standard 5-volt, 1-amp USB connection and does not include a charging brick in the box. So you need to provide your own charging brick like from a phone charger. Just make sure it's 1 amp because that's required. And unfortunately, the FP2 flat will not work with any PD style charger, so keep that in mind. Make sure you're using an old style USB-A wall charger. I feel like this might be a small miss on Aqara's part because it might confuse people if they plug it into the wrong style of charger. Now here's a quick tip. If you do want to mount it somewhere far away from an outlet, like in a ceiling or a wall, you might want to look at using a USB-C power over Ethernet adapter. Then you can just run an Ethernet cable to that location, connect it to the adapter, and connect the adapter to the Aqara FP2. This way you can power your device from a PoE switch or an injector. Now for connection, this of course uses Wi-Fi. So we're not looking at a Zigbee, Z-Wave, or any other style here. It uses Wi-Fi and just 2.4 gigahertz 802.11b, G, and N style Wi-Fi. So keep that in mind, 5 gigahertz is not supported. It of course also has onboard Bluetooth in use for setting up the device the first time. Now, if you care, the radar frequency this particular device uses is 60 to 64 gigahertz. Even though this is an indoor sensor, it actually has an IPX5 rating, which means it can be used in high humidity environments like bathrooms or even outdoor as long as it's under an eave and it won't receive direct water on it. So keep that in mind. This does not mean this is waterproof or water resistant. It just means it can be placed in a humid environment where direct water spray will not hit it because of course the port on the back is not waterproof. Also make sure if you're using it outdoors that you're using an appropriately rated USB power adapter. Now it does have a temperature range from 14 degrees Fahrenheit to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, this is not something you probably want to use outdoors, but if you're going to use it in something like a bathroom, then you won't have to worry about the device getting damaged because of warmer temperatures or high humidity. Now before I did mention that you do have multiple mount options. There's quite a bit of flexibility with the built-in mount. But there are two distinct mounting styles that you need to be aware of. One is mounting it flat to a wall, and the other one is ceiling mount. The reason why this is important is because there are some features that are only available when the device is mounted to a wall, and there are some features that are only available when it's mounted at the ceiling. We'll go over that here in just a second. Now, this device has 120 degrees of sensing, which means it's not a full 180 degrees left to right. It has more of a cone out the front, so keep that in mind if you mount it to a flat wall. So down here in my basement, I'm mounting it to this back wall over here, which should get most of the rest of the room except for the nook over here. So I'm looking for some alternative mounting methods right now. Now when you do mount it to the wall, you get access to the zone features. What this means is you can carve your room up into 30 individual zones. Each of these zones can be used to trigger an automation. And this even passes through to other devices that you connect, which we'll talk about in a second. Now the maximum sensing area or room coverage is about 340 square feet. And again, to use these zone features, the wall mount is required. Now let's talk about the other mounting method, ceiling mounting. Now, when you do the ceiling mounted method, you lose out on those zone features, but you do gain one additional feature, and this is fall detection. So say if you wanted to install this in an elderly family member's bedroom, you could know if they've fallen off the bed and are on the ground. This is great for elder care and aging in place. So again, depending on how you mount it, you get different features. And it actually knows when you set it up, it'll tell you which mode it's in and advise you on what features are available when you're using the app. Now, this has an ultra high precision sensor that can actually detect up to 5 people in a room at a time and locate them individually on a map. Now, I have noticed this gets a little buggy if you go over 3 people. So the rating on the website actually says 3 people is about the average, but it can detect up to 5. So you can have your automations running depending on where a person is sitting in a room. Now, because of that high accuracy, there are chances of getting some interference. And when you take the device through the setup process, it'll actually detect things in your room that might give off interference. One of the things that I've noticed that gives off interference are my wireless chargers. It seems to find those and blacklist them automatically, which is pretty cool. Now on top of all the presence detection, it also has a light sensor on board. So you can use this in conjunction with different lighting platforms to give you a custom scene depending on the time of day or the amount of light in the room, which is pretty cool. Now along with just using it as a standalone device, you can also use it with an Aqara hub for additional automations, or Apple HomeKit, Google Assistant, Amazon Alexa, or IFTTT. And if you use it with HomeKit, you can actually integrate it directly with Home Assistant because it is a network device. So that's pretty cool, and that's what I've got mine set up with right now, and it's super responsive. And if you are using either the Aqara hub or HomeKit, all your automations will run locally, meaning that the detection will still work even if your internet is down. Of course, your Wi-Fi needs to be up, but if your cloud connection is down, you can still run local-based automations on those two platforms. All right, that's it for the features on paper. Let's actually get it set up and you can see those features in action. Now, I've already covered the two main methods of mounting this device, on the wall or on the ceiling. You can either do that by putting the adhesive disc on the back of the metal plate and sticking it where you want it, or you can use the included hardware to screw it directly onto a spot on your wall or ceiling. And of course, remember, you're going to need to be able to run power to this location. In my case, I'm going to end up punching a small hole in my wall and running the cord back through there to an outlet behind that wall. If you have a more difficult location, see my earlier comments about a PoE splitter. You can also set this up on a counter or a flat surface by utilizing the built-in stand. This is a good temporary installation location and something if you're testing it before you actually stick something to your wall or drill a hole. Now, if you do want to mount it into the corner, I mentioned before I found a great 3D printable corner mount from printables user Zazu. Now, I've got a link to it down here and in the description below. Now, other reviewers have said the corner mount is probably the ideal location because you get maximum range. The only problem is the app doesn't support it necessarily, so when you're looking at the grid, it's a little off that the grid shows your sensor in the middle and not in the corner. But I've heard they're going to be releasing a firmware update soon to allow you to move the sensor to the corner of the grid for easier setup. All right, with that out of the way, let's get the device set up in the app. So of course, you're going to need to have an Aqara Home app installed and also an account set up. So once you're logged into your app, all you have to do is hit the plus button in the top right-hand corner and say Add Accessory. Then under Sensor, you can select Aqara FP2. If it doesn't show up, you might need to update your Aqara app. So we're going to select the sensor. Now, once you've plugged the device into your supplied power brick, then you're going to need to let the device power up. You want the light on top to be flashing yellow. If it's not, you're going to need to reset the device. So to reset the device, hold down the reset button on the top for 5 seconds. Once the device is flashing yellow, you can proceed. So it's going to scan and find the device. So we're going to select it, and then we're going to set up our Wi-Fi. Again, remember, 2.4 gigahertz only, no 5 gig. Now, if you're on Android, you might get a little prompt at the bottom to indicate it's going to connect to the device. Go ahead and hit connect. And once the device is connected, the light on the device should flash blue, and it should say successful in the app. Now, of course, you can give it a name and assign it to a location. Now, before we set everything up, you are required to use the Aqara app to initially set up the device, get it on your Wi-Fi, and define your zones. After that, you can use it in conjunction with one of the other platforms we talked about before, but you will need the Aqara app to make any zone changes. So just keep that in mind. Before we continue with setup, make sure you have the sensor approximately where you're going to want to have it permanently installed. There's no sense in going through all the zone setup until you actually have it where you want it. So once we click on the device, it's going to take us through the setup wizard. So first, it'll automatically detect which mode you have the device in. If by chance it doesn't detect it, you can manually set it to either wall mounted or ceiling mounted. And then it's going to have you walk around the room so you can figure out where the edges of your room are, because you may have a room that's smaller than the detection area. Once you go through the automated setup, it's going to go ahead and figure out where the edges of your room are and any interference locations. Again, if it's incorrect, you can always go back and modify it later on. I've got mine set up right now as a blank canvas. So this is the zone management screen. On here is where you can add individual zones that'll show up as individual sensors. You can also deploy templates, but I recommend just doing it from scratch. You can add stickers, which will allow you to define certain areas of the room, like where your couch is or things like that. It's just more for visual. It doesn't actually affect the sensor itself. So if you wanted to create a zone, you could just click on New Zone, and then you're going to draw on the grid where that zone is. So I typically recommend walking through the different areas of your room and then go from corner to corner and then mark those area and fill in the rest of it as each zone. Of course, a zone has to be square or L-shaped, but you can go around to different areas in your room and define different zones. Now, I would say use the minimum number of zones as possible, meaning there's more chances of you sliding out into another zone and maybe the detection automation you set up won't be correct. Now, for each zone, you can define the color, You can define whether it's a detection zone, an entrance zone, or an interference zone. Again, if you find areas where you're getting false positives, where it shows a person is there and there's nobody there, you can mark this as an interference zone and it will ignore it entirely. You can add some metadata for type if you would like, and you can also change the monitoring sensitivity of that area from low to high, depending on if you end up getting false positives in that area. Of course, you can tap on the pencil icon to change the name of the zone. So going back to the main menu for the FP2, at the top, we're gonna see the live view of the room. So right now, there's just me in the room. I've got no zone set up, but here in a second, you'll see what a fully laid out room looks like. You can also get back to the installation mode, where if you wanted to change the way you have it installed, you can go back into zone management to add or remove zones. Then if you click below that, it'll show you the history of whether it detected presence in the room or not. This is the global sensor, so if there is somebody in any of the zones or detected at all in the room, it'll show this one as on or off. This is great because you can set up automations where if somebody's in the room at all, or if they're in a specific zone. So very flexible. And then below that, you'll see the illuminance sensor. You can of course click on this and it will show you the different illumination in the room based on the time of day. Then if you click on the three dots, it'll take you into the device settings. You can change the device cards, which are specific to the Aqara app, which I'm not really gonna use that much here. You can change the function setting, which will turn on and off the light if you want in like a do not disturb mode. Change the detection type, the sensitivity, the proximity distance, and the fall detection sensitivity. These are all things you're gonna play around with to get your device set for your room. Now, one thing I will note is a return to absence sensor. This is great if you leave the room and you notice that there's still things being detected. You can use this to clear that out, and it will kind of learn to see where those problem areas are. If you do continue to have presence detected while you're out of the room and there's nobody in the room, then you might need to go in and set up interference zones. And of course at the bottom are device information like network information, firmware information, things like that. And you probably will have a firmware update right out of the box. I've already applied mine. At the bottom, you can also remove the accessory if you need to delete it in factory reset. So now that we have everything set up in the Aqara app, now we can set it up with your smart home system of choice. Now, if you're gonna be using this with the Google Assistant, Alexa, or IFTTT, you're going to actually set up the integration via the Aqara integration on that particular platform. So that means those devices are all gonna be utilizing the Aqara cloud, so if your internet's down, those won't work. But if you want to use HomeKit, that will be local and compatible with Home Assistant. So if you're gonna set this up with HomeKit, it's just like any other HomeKit device. You take your iOS device, add a new device, scan the QR code on the back of the FP2, and then follow the instructions to get it added into HomeKit. Again, you're going to want to utilize the Aqara app to add zones and make settings to the actual device. Then you're going to see those zones reflected in HomeKit. Now for Home Assistant, the same process is true, except for when you do connect to the device, except for you're going to see it automatically detected in your settings and integrations page. It should show up in the top left-hand corner. It's going to ask you to set it up and then provide the PIN number below the QR code. Type that in, and then it will be added and connected into Home Assistant. And again, all of your sensors will be replicated into Home Assistant. Now, you'll notice that the names don't come over. So you're gonna have to go in order that you created those zones. So you might have to play with this a little bit to figure out which zone number is the zone you've created, unless you just did it. You probably know the order that you put it in. Now, if you look at the Home Assistant integration, we'll see that we get the master zone, which is basically if there's any motion detected or any presence detected in that particular area, or we have each individual zone. So again, you're gonna have two sensors on at a time. You're gonna have the specific zone the person's in, and you're gonna have the global one. So you can have automation set off on either one of them. You also get the illuminance sensor brought through to Home Assistant as well. So now you can set up your automations to be based off a person entering these zones. And unlike your passive infrared sensors, you don't have to have any additional logic. If a person is in that zone is gonna stay on. So you can just have it when that zone turns off, that's when the person leaves. So that's pretty cool, and that makes this completely different than all other sensors on the market. Now the FP2 is priced at $84 US. Now this is higher than most motion or presence sensors, by quite a bit. However, it's important to note this sensor can actually replace a large number of additional sensors you might need for a larger open room, which ultimately might save you money in the long run. Additionally, this sensor is built with advanced technology that ensures greater accuracy and reliability, making it more powerful than most other sensors on the market. And when you compare it with other millimeter wave sensors, it's definitely on the high side versus Tuya and the Presence One sensor. However, if it does fit your use case, I think it's worth your investment. Now let's look at the pros real quick. This is going to be great in large open rooms and can do different automations based on where you are in the room. Plus, because it's millimeter wave, it can detect somebody even if they're sleeping, lying down, or sitting in a chair. It's also packed with multiple features. It can detect many people in a room. It's got a wide range of sensing area. You can do automations based on location and more. Also, it's got a light sensor on board, which most of the Aqara motion sensors have, but it's still a plus that it's got that on board. And of course, because it is powered from your AC mains, there's no batteries to worry about. But on the con side, you actually have to use AC power. So your installation location is pretty limited to somewhere close to power or where you want to run cable. Of course, another con is the price. This isn't something that you're going to be buying probably for every single room in your house, nor is it actually designed for that. It's probably better to focus on larger open rooms for this type of sensor. Another disadvantage is some of the features are still buggy. Multi-person detection isn't really that reliable. It can detect multiple people in a room, but sometimes I get duplication because it's reflecting off of a surface. So it really depends on your setup whether this is actually usable or not. Also, it's susceptible to interference. So do take it through the setup process and make sure you do zone out those areas that do cause interference. And as I said before, this sensor at its price point is definitely overkill for smaller rooms. Now overall, the sensor is truly remarkable for its ability to excel in specific use cases, particularly in large open rooms. With this advanced technology, it has the power to completely revolutionize the way that you create your automations. And because it's durable and has some environmental protection, it should continue to perform in any room in your house for years to come. All in all, I do truly believe the sensor does live up to its game changer status in the world of smart home tech. And I'm sure if set up correctly, it'll make a significant impact on the way you approach your smart home and its automations. Now, if you'd like to pick up one of these, as of the release of this video in early August 2023, they are actually in stock on Amazon. And if you want to support the channel, please use the links down in the description. It means a lot and lets Aqara know that you came from my channel. And of course, if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below or jump on our Discord server. I try to answer each and every one's questions. Again, I want to thank Aqara for sponsoring this and my U100 lock video. If you missed that awesome smart deadbolt, you can check out the video right up here. Now, if you'd like to see some examples of powerful home assistant-based automations and how to set them up, check out this playlist right here. And as always, if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe for more smart home tech reviews and projects by clicking right over here. Thank you again, and I'll see you on the next video.